Taylor Walker from the Adelaide Crows, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Shannon Hurn from the West Coast Eagles.
This is Nathan Jones from the Melbourne Football Club.
Phil Davis from the GWS Giants.
It's Brad Avery from the Port Adelaide Football Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hello, you got MJ. Welcome to another of the 50 most relevant as we work our way through who I believe are the most relevant players in fantasy football for salary cap, Supercoach, Dream Team, AFL Fantasy, all put together in one universal list to help me chat through the number that lands at 17 of the countdown. I'm talking about Zac Merrett of the Essendon Football Club. I got Jimmy on the line. Hello, mate. How are you?
Hello, MJ. Hello, listeners.
Let's talk about Zac Merrett. Still just the 24 years old, a midfielder from the Essendon Football Club. And despite last year certainly not being the peak of his powers, we still got to see some of the best of Zac Merrett. A 138 against Gold Coast was his best AFL Fantasy and Dream Team score, while it was 130 for Supercoach. That was against the eventual runners-up in the grand final, Collingwood. His averages last year are quite a bit of a drop away from what he'd done for previous seasons, but there's a reason for it, and we will talk about it. It's a 101.4 in AFL Fantasy and 100.3 in Supercoach. From a price perspective, he's going to see back just under $550K in Supercoach and around about $730,000, a little bit more in AFL Fantasy and a little less in Dream Team. And Jimmy, when we talk about Zac Merrett, he's really one of the best fantasy football premiums we have going around. But last year, if you started him, he was unique. And he really did have an injury-impacted season right from the get-go. Inside the first quarter, he and Adelaide Crow Richard Douglas decided that they needed to get a little bit closer. Clash ended up concussion, out of the game. And that, for some coaches, kind of summed up their fantasy football season. It was done before it even got started.
Oh, look, and it's just terrible luck when that happens. It's one of those things you can't possibly predict it. And all the reasons for starting him last year were perfectly valid. There was no reason not to do it. And if you did take him and you had him as a unique, you would have felt pretty good about that going into the year. And it's just, as you say, one of those things. Unfortunately, it happens. It's part of the game, and all you can do is cop it and move on.
He was on track for 100. I know it was only the first quarter, but as an owner at the time myself, I'm like, this is look at the goods, my friend. But then he didn't miss a game for the remainder of the year, but it was pretty evident that there was still some of those lingering concussion impacts there, while no doubt cleared by the medical staff, especially in that round 3 matchup. You could kind of watch him and you're like, he still doesn't look quite himself. Round 2, he got a pretty heavy tag from second game player Banfield at that time. But it was round 4 that he got his first ton for the year against Port Adelaide. And then we started to see him back towards his best. It was not a bad year. I don't want to cast aspersions over the Essendon medical team or anything.
No. They've got a reputation to uphold, but it's he clearly was not right in that first game back.
Well, you could just see, not only was it the tag against Fremantle, but then you look into how he was kind of rolling through the rest of the year against the Western Bulldogs. It was just the 13 touches. It was his lowest possession count throughout the year. Wasn't really getting tag of the Bulldogs don't really tag, and so it was quite evident that things weren't quite right.
No, not at all, not at all. But as you said at the start, when he is on fire, he's as good as it gets from a fantasy point of view, and now we've got a chance to pick him up underpriced.
Yeah, we do. Look, he managed still the 14 odd tons across AFL Fantasy last year, 6 of them 120 and averaged 101, 15 Supercoach
and that's
tons.
A down season.
Yeah, I know. That's crazy, isn't it? 15 Supercoach tons, 4 of them were 120 and a flat average of 100. And so, yeah, you're right. We're talking about a guy that a bad year is still mid-teens hundreds, probably what we didn't see out of him last season in 2018. That we did in other years was probably maybe a lack of ceiling about it. And part of that was him working his way through a tag, and part of it were these games where he was impacted a little bit early on in the year.
Yeah, no doubt. And this year, as far as that tag goes, he's going to have Shiel running alongside him as well, which I think might change things a little bit.
Well, you look at how Dylan Shiel, the new inclusion into the Essendon Football Club, they had the likes of Josh Kelly, Lockie Whitfield, Callan Ward, Stephen Cornelio, and young kids like Hopper and Taranto, Scully at times rolling through there prior to his move to Hawthorn. And yet Dylan Shiel was almost 8 out of, if not 9 out of 10 times an opposition chose to go for a negating midfielder, Shiel was the primary target. And while Zac Merrett on his day can be a real damaging accumulator of the ball, he doesn't have the same skill set that Dylan Shiel does, where he's going to cut you up on the inside and the outside with not just his precision use of the ball by foot, but also that damaging burst away out of speed from a stoppage. And, yes, Zac's got some perfectly incredible football skills. He lacks that burst from stoppage that Shiel does that makes him such a hard player to combat against, and you do need to shut him down.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And if I'm choosing... if I'm an opposition coach and I'm looking at which of the two I'm going to tag, it's Shiel every day.
Yeah, I think so. And look, there are some positives about Zac's last year, and then I want to talk about his 2016 and 17. To remind us what he can do is, as the year went on, the tags certainly, or the defensive midfielder at stoppages certainly were very evident for Zac. But as the year went on, he started to find his way to work through it. Again, the big ceiling, those crazy 140, 150s that we've seen over previous years weren't as frequent. Just the handful of 120 scores across the formats this year. Kind of 1 in 3 of his tons was that big 120 plus 140, sort of scores. But towards the end of the year, he started to figure it out how to work his way through a tag. And in fact, post-bye, the final 10 games, his lowest score across both formats was a 93. He just had the one score in Supercoach that wasn't a ton. I think it was only 2 in AFL Fantasy that won't. And he averaged over 110 across both formats to end the year. And so here we're getting a guy that's priced at 100, basically, across the formats, who's learnt to work his way through a tag and averaged 110 in the final back end of the year, which is much closer to what we saw over the previous seasons beforehand.
Oh, exactly right. And I mean, yesterday when we were talking about Miles and how he's probably at least 15, if not 20 points or more underpriced, you can make exactly the same argument for Merrett here, and if he does hit that mark, he's very much a top 10 midfield keeper compared to Miles, who you need to upgrade.
Yeah, exactly.
There's an awful lot to like about this.
There is, and then you go back and look at those 2 seasons prior. Just missed the one game, but during those 43 games in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, 33 tons, 22 of those were over 120, and a combined average of those 2 seasons of 117, while in Supercoach, 27 tons across those 43 games. 17 of those hundreds were over 120 and an average of 110. So you're right. We're getting a guy who consistently now, over really 3 or 2.5 years of data, probably to be fair, we're seeing he's got a big ceiling about him. He's a pretty safe 110 averaging midfielder, no matter the format, and yet we're paying for 100. There's little reason not to start him this preseason.
Look, and when you look at it like that and you put all of that data out there in front of you, my only question, MJ, I think at this point is, why is he only number 17 on this list? Who the hell have we got who's a bigger and more relevant pick than him?
Well, that's where people obviously, it's a very, very subjective list, and so people have different opinions and thoughts and feelings, but there are some big midfielders, some big forwards, maybe some rucks, maybe a few defenders.
2.5 weeks coming up.
There are lots of players in there, but I think some of the thing that may have dampened people's enthusiasm about him, and maybe while he slid back on the list a little bit, is the fact that he has suffered an injury during the preseason. Now, thankfully, it's early in the preseason on the other side of Christmas, because where most of the fitness base is built for clubs coming into a new preseason that didn't play finals, is done pre-Christmas. So thankfully he's done all the fitness-based work, sort of through there. But he was in a moon boot. Depending on which journalist you follow on Twitter, he had an ACL, sort of injury. But look, while he's still not back to full fitness and health, and has spent some time in a moon boot, he is still expected not just to be right for round 1, but right for the JLT in just a couple of weeks' time. And so I think any concern that you have, maybe whether there's some lingering effects with that preseason injury that's there, but from all reports, according to the medical team at Essendon, and even from Zac himself, he's come out in the media and said, I'm going to be right to go for the JLT. So that gives you some confidence, but that's probably one of the reasons he may have slipped back a little bit in the 50, and also why coaches may have cooled on him, seeing that, look, he hasn't done as much of the match simulation as they'd like at this point in time. He has been impacted, and maybe some people have a rule in the preseason of, if you get injured, no matter who you are, no matter how big the injury, you're out. That's probably where you start to find reasons not to pick him.
Oh, look, I suppose there's a bit about it, and the other thing too for some coaches could be that there's only so many of these underpriced premiums you can pick.
Yeah.
And if you're wanting to start with a couple of the big guns and you want to lock in a McRae and lock in, say, an Oliver and a Josh Kelly, you're picking a Miles or a Libba or a Hannahs or two of them potentially at that lower end, a handful of rookies. You've only got 1, 2, maybe 3 at most spots left to fill, and then you're making choices. You're picking Merrett, you're picking Fife, you're picking Matt Crouch, or you're picking Brad Crouch. All of the Taylor Adams is another, Dusty. So many of that type of player who we can make reasonable arguments are underpriced. Which ones do you go for? And for me, I think Merrett is a pretty easy lock across the formats at this point from that point of view, but I can certainly understand why coaches might be looking at some of those other options instead. Yeah,
look, maybe it's their buy structure, especially if Tom Mitchell was still available. That would have made it real interesting with McRae and Mitchell sharing the same buy round as Nat, Fife and Zac Merrett. That may have kind of topped some people out. Again, that's no longer a variable that coaches need to consider. But I really struggle to see a world where, unless injury impacts the start to his season, where I don't start him across definitely Dream Team and AFL Fantasy. I want to find a way to fit him in Supercoach, but like you've said, there's so many of these different value premiums and really, really hard to say no stepping stones, let alone the big boys. That's where maybe Merrett might drip away in Supercoach a little bit. I do think his numbers are huge.
One of the formats, it'd be that one.
I think in fantasy, it's almost impossible to say no, given the 2 trades a week. In Dream Team, similar. If he's going to drop away in any format because of value, I think you're right. I think it's Supercoach.
Yeah, no doubt at all for me on that one. But the other format, Ultimate Footy or your draft format, so whichever platform you're using, is a very interesting choice to make in that one too.
It's going to be fascinating to see what people do. I want to get your take on it in a keeper league in just a moment, both where he goes in a startup and what you do with him in an existing. Hold him is the simple answer, but if you were to use like the Draft Doctor's Draft Simulator, which came out on Saturday, just yesterday, depending on when you're listening to this episode, you can go around and have different versions of Ultimate Footy, Supercoach, Fantasy Draft and see where it is. I reckon you'll be able to get him as an M2, which would mean second round. But by the end of the third round, there's no way he's gone. He's still there. Like, yes, he's even a chance of a first round pick.
Yeah, look, he's a chance of a first-round pick. I think if someone takes him there, they're reaching a little bit early compared to where they could get him.
Yeah.
I think, on that run back on the second, if there's a lot of mids taken early, but I think part of the thing this year is there are so many premium and top-line premium defenders and rucks and forwards between the 3 lines as viable alternatives to midfielders in the first and second rounds. There is a reasonable chance that Merrett does slip through to the third, especially because he's sitting on the draft sheet with an average of 100.
Yeah.
And when you're looking at it and you're going, okay, well, I need to pick my second mid. Is it going to be Sidebottom or Trelaw or whoever else who's got that sort of 105, 108 sort of mark that's coming up on that first page of mids? You may not even be flicking to the second page. So I think there's a reasonable chance in a lot of leagues where he will fall to the late second or into the third, and you can pick him up as your second mid, assuming you've picked one in the first couple.
Yeah, I think that's about right. If he's there in the third, you take him. Like, you absolutely take him.
Absolutely. And what it also means is because we've got players like him that present as viable M1s, if they do what we think they're going to do, it means there's no reason not to take a Ford and a defender or a ruck and a Ford in the first 2 rounds, knowing that you've got a vast swath of midfielders that you can pick that could easily average over 100 in the 3rd and 4th and 5th rounds.
Yeah, you could be getting him at an M2 position, whether that be a 2nd or a 3rd round, but getting the scoring of an M1, and that's the exciting possibilities with Zac Merrett. In a startup keeper league, I'm keen to get your take. I've got him in a brand new keeper league as one of the top 5 selections going. What about you?
Yeah, I'm not sure if he's quite top 5, but he's certainly not far off it. Again, I think he's clearly in the first round or 2. No real questions asked about that.
Yeah.
I think if we look at as far as brand new keeper leagues go, most of the players who will be taken in the first round of a single season draft
will go in a first for a
probably
keeper.
Still first round choices in a brand new keeper as well. There's not too many of them that are the wrong side of, say, 26 or 27, but that you're looking at straight off the bat. You're still picking McRae in the first couple. You're still picking Grundy in the first couple. There's Laird and Lloyd would probably go first round in
that's true.
Keeper as well. So when we look at that type of player, Clayton Oliver's another. You can make reasonable cases again for Treloar or that type too. So Merrett certainly fits comfortably in that conversation with those names, but I think
it starts to become about personal preference, really, doesn't it? It's
really
pretty much
does.
from
And if
about
you're an
5 to
Essendon fan,
15.
yeah.
You can build this case for, whether it be Merrett goes at 5 or Merrett goes at 15, you're not going to go, what a horrible choice. You're just going, oh, yeah, I get why you do that. In an existing keeper league, though, it feels like this might be the chance you'd get to get him out of someone's hands, but someone that's owned Zac Merrett in an you're keeper league for anything beyond last year, they know just how good he is, and good luck getting him.
That's it. We all know exactly how good he is. I don't think that's part of the question at all. But you're right. After the numbers he produced last year, where it was only 100, and the injuries he's had in the off season, and that inclusion of Shield, I suppose you could try and make an argument that works against him rather than for him. All of those things, I guess, you could try and, if there was a time to get him, this would be the time to pitch a subtle offer. You're still going to have to pay a lot for him. You're not going to be able to swap some sort of trash out there. But he's still considered a premium, and rightly so, and it'll take a premium price to get him out of a coach, I'd expect.
Or a really big premium.
If that coach knows what he's doing, you're paying well overs for it.
Yeah, you're going to have to. Hey, man, appreciate your thoughts as we've talked about Zac Merrett today.
No worries, mate. Anytime.
Yeah, I thought you might want to talk about one of your keeper boys. If you want to go and check out the article.
You're not getting him cheaply.
Oh, well, I tried. I thought I'd weave all my way in through the episode. It didn't work. You can check out my article on him right now at coachespanel.tv, as well as all the other players from the 50 most relevant. You can check out the podcast. Make sure you leave it a 5-star rating and review. And if you love what you're getting from the Coaches Panel, you want to become a part of our Patreon, you can do that at coachespanel.tv while you're there. Tomorrow, the number 16 of the 50 most relevant, getting close to my top 15. And this one, again, like Zac Merrett, maybe it's too low in the countdown for you, because I don't think you're going to have the argument that he's in too high.